The ice in my glass had already melted by the time my father stood up. It was late afternoon at my grandmother's farm in Central Virginia. The air smelled like cut grass and charcoal. Folding chairs scraped against stone. Someone's toddler was chasing a firefly near the fence. My father tapped his spoon lightly against his glass. "I'd like to introduce my real daughter," he said, resting his hand on my stepsister's shoulder. "And as for Olivia, well, she was the mistake from my first marriage." There was a pause. Then a few people laughed. Not loudly, just enough. I kept my face still. I've had a lot of practice doing that. I held my water glass in both hands and looked at the fire pit instead of him. His new wife smiled politely. My stepsister stared at her lap. The string lights flickered on above us like nothing unusual had happened. What no one at that table knew was that I had something on my phone. Something that had been sitting there for 3 months. I hadn't planned to use it. I hadn't even planned to talk about it. But that sentence changed things. And it started months earlier, with a message that wasn't meant for me. My name is Olivia Hart. I'm 30. My parents divorced when I was 8. I don't remember the argument that ended it. I remember the quiet afterward. The way my mother folded my father's shirts into a box without saying anything. He remarried 2 years later, a woman named Denise. Denise was younger than him, polished in a way that suggested she'd never spilled coffee on a white blouse. She had a daughter from before, Emma, 2 years younger than me, blonde, soft-spoken, careful. Within 6 months, Emma had my old bedroom at my dad's house. It made sense, Denise said. Emma lived there full-time. I was just there on weekends. Then the weekends got shorter. Sometimes Denise would call my mom on Friday afternoons. "Greg's exhausted this week. Maybe next time." Next time turned into holidays, then select holidays. Every December, a Christmas card arrived at my mother's townhouse in Richmond. My father, Denise, Emma, coordinated outfits, a golden retriever, smiles that looked professionally rehearsed. I was never in one. For years, I told myself it was an oversight. 22 years is a long time to call something an oversight. I still showed up when I was invited. I still sent birthday messages. I still believed that if I stayed steady enough, kind enough, patient enough, he would eventually see me clearly. I was wrong about that for a long time. The day I graduated from nursing school was one of the few days I let myself feel proud. 4 years of night classes, clinical rotations, loans I tried not to calculate too closely. I mailed my father 2 tickets. Front row. I wrote a short note. "It would mean a lot if you were there." He texted back 3 days later. Wouldn't miss it. The morning of the ceremony, I ironed my white dress twice. My mother drove 90 minutes to attend. She sat in the second row. The 2 seats in the first row stayed empty. When I got home that evening, I checked social media. There was a photo of my father at a baseball game with Denise and Emma, posted 3 hours before my ceremony. He had his arm around both of them. He hadn't forgotten. He'd chosen. I put the phone face down. My mother found me on the porch later that night. She didn't ask questions. She just sat beside me and said quietly, "You don't have to keep proving you belong." I nodded, but I wasn't ready to stop trying. 6 months before the reunion, I was halfway through a 12-hour ER shift when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but I opened it. "Hey, can't wait for July. Same plan as last year?" I stared at the message. It didn't make sense. Then another one came the next week. A photo. Denise sitting across from a man in a restaurant booth. Their hands were touching over a basket of bread. The lighting was dim, intimate, not accidental. Below it, "Miss you already." My stomach dropped, but not for the reason you might think. The messages weren't meant for me. They were meant for Denise. And somehow, they were coming to my phone. I didn't respond. I didn't confront anyone. I took screenshots. I created a folder. Then I put the phone face down, and I waited. The third message arrived 2 weeks later. A hotel mirror selfie from the same man. A name finally attached. Marcus. Now I understood what had happened. When I switched carriers years ago, my old number must have cycled back into circulation. Denise must have given that number to someone as her own, someone she didn't want my father knowing about. I wasn't looking for leverage, but leverage had found me, and I held on to it quietly. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell my grandmother. I didn't even play the voice note that came in one evening while I was driving home from a shift. I just saved everything. Folder, passcode, locked. Then I waited. The invitation to the reunion came from my grandmother, not my father. "You're coming," she said over the phone. Her voice was steady, certain. "I don't know if Dad wants—" "That's not his decision," she replied. So I said yes. I drove down to the farm on a warm July morning. Gravel crunched under my tires. The house looked the same as it always had. White paint, wraparound porch, oak trees that had seen more than all of us. I helped set up tables, laid out mason jars, folded napkins into triangles. My grandmother squeezed my hand once and said, "Whatever happens today, stand straight." I didn't know what she meant, or maybe I did. Cars started arriving around noon. Then, at 1:10 exactly, my father's black SUV pulled in. Denise stepped out first. Emma followed, my father last. He passed me on the porch and gave a small nod. "Oh, you came." 2 words, no hug. I smiled anyway. Then I waited. The afternoon settled into its usual rhythm. Paper plates, iced tea, small conversations that moved in circles. The kind of reunion where people talk about weather and traffic before they talk about anything real. Denise moved easily through the yard. She touched elbows lightly, laughed at the right volume, introduced Emma to relatives who already knew her. "Have you met our Emma?" she said to my uncle near the grill. "She's looking at pre-law, top of her class." Emma smiled on cue. It was a practice smile, not fake, just trained. When someone asked what I'd been up to, Denise answered before I could. "Olivia's still working nights at the hospital," she said, hand pressed lightly to her chest. Bless her heart. If you grew up in the South, you know what that means. It sounds warm. It isn't. I didn't correct her. I didn't add anything. I just took a sip of water and let the conversation move on. I've learned something about being overlooked. If you fight every small dismissal, you exhaust yourself before the real moments arrive. So I conserved my energy. Around mid-afternoon, my cousin Daniel pulled me aside near the fence. "Hey," he said quietly, glancing toward the main table. "Is it true your dad's updating the estate again?" I felt the air shift, just slightly. "I've heard that," I said. "Denise was telling Aunt Carol you're not included this time. Something about cleaning things up." He said it like gossip, but it wasn't gossip. It was positioning. I nodded once. "Thanks for telling me." I didn't react, not outwardly, but I filed it away. That night, after I drove back home, I reviewed the folder on my phone again. Dates, timestamps, geotags, the restaurant in Norfolk, the hotel in Alexandria. Messages spaced across 3 months. There was one I hadn't opened yet. A voice note. I sat at my kitchen counter, still in scrubs, and pressed play. It was brief. A man's voice. Casual. Familiar. "Same time Tuesday. He'll never know." I didn't rewind it. I didn't need to. I placed the phone face down. Then I made tea and stood by the window for a long time. 2 weeks before the reunion, I drove to see my mother. She lives in a small brick townhouse outside Richmond, the same one she moved into after the divorce. The same yellow curtains still hang in the kitchen. She poured chamomile tea, too much honey, like always. "Your grandmother called," she said. I looked up. "Your father's been finalizing paperwork, the trust, the property share, everything." I waited. "He's leaving it to Emma." She didn't say it with anger. She said it like a weather report. I stared into my tea. The honey swirled slowly at the bottom. I don't care about the money, I said. I know you don't, she replied. But this isn't about money. It's about record. Once it's on paper, that's the version people accept. She wasn't wrong. Documents outlast conversations. Silence, especially repeated silence, becomes agreement. I drove home that night with the windows down. Summer air thick and heavy. For the first time, I allowed myself to think differently, not emotionally, structurally. In the ER, when things get chaotic, we don't yell. We move in steps. Step 1, stabilize. Step 2, assess. Step 3, act only when necessary. I applied the same rule to this. Step 1, gather everything. Step 2, verify. Step 3, decide if disclosure is required. I wasn't looking for revenge. I don't operate that way. I just wanted accuracy. Over the next week, 2 more messages came through. One was a simple text. Does Emma suspect anything? The reply, which came through because of the misdirected number, quoted Denise's response. She doesn't know. Greg thinks she's mine. That's what matters. I read it twice, then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Emma had always been introduced as Denise's biological daughter from a previous relationship. That was the foundation of everything, the reason my father stepped fully into that role, the justification for rewriting his version of family. If that foundation wasn't true, then everything built on it was unstable. I didn't feel anger. I felt weight. I saved the screenshot, locked the folder. Then I waited. The day of the reunion arrived warm and bright. Gravel under tires, cicadas in the trees, my grandmother already seated on the porch with sweet tea in hand. Early, she said. Traffic was light, I replied. We set tables together, 40 place settings, 40 forks. She stopped once and looked at me carefully. You holding up? She asked. I am. She nodded. That nod meant more than encouragement. It meant awareness. By 1 p.m, relatives filled the yard. Plates clinked. Someone tuned a portable speaker. Then my father stood and said the line about the mistake. Laughter rose and faded. The string lights flickered on overhead. And for the first time in 22 years, something inside me shifted from endurance to decision. I didn't move immediately. I didn't speak yet. But I knew this wasn't a moment for swallowing anything. This was a moment for clarity. I set my glass down carefully on the edge of the table. Then I reached into my pocket and paused. Then I waited. I didn't pull the phone out right away. There's a difference between reacting and responding. I've learned that in trauma rooms at 3 a.m. The loudest person is rarely the most effective one. So I stayed seated for another minute. My father continued speaking. He talked about legacy, about loyalty, about how family is something you choose. His hand rested firmly on Emma's shoulder. She'll be taking the Hart name legally, he said. I've already started the paperwork. A few relatives clapped lightly, not enthusiastically, just politely. I watched Emma's face. She wasn't smiling anymore. She looked unsure, like someone standing on a stage without knowing her lines. Then my father turned toward me. I wish Olivia the best, he added, as if wrapping up a business transaction. But she was never really part of this version of our family. That was the second line. The first one hurt. The second one clarified. I stood up slowly. No rush, no drama, just stood. The gravel shifted under my shoes. 40 pairs of eyes followed the movement. My name is Olivia Hart, I said calmly. I'm 30 years old. I've worked in emergency medicine for 6 years. I let that sit for a moment, not as an accomplishment, just as fact. I've come to every reunion I've been invited to. I've called on birthdays. I sent graduation announcements. I mailed Christmas gifts. My voice didn't shake. I was grateful for that. Tonight, I was introduced as a mistake. Silence moved through the yard. the kind that isn't planned. I don't need to debate whether I belong here, I continued. But I do believe in accuracy. Denise shifted in her chair. I finally reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, unlocked it. No theatrics, just movement. 3 months ago, I began receiving text messages that weren't meant for me, I said. My father's expression changed slightly. Confusion, not concern. They were sent to this number by accident. Messages intended for Denise. Denise stood up halfway. I have no idea what you're implying, she said quickly. I'm not implying anything, I replied. I'm presenting documentation. I walked 3 steps to my Aunt Marlene, who works in finance and has never tolerated exaggeration. I handed her the phone. She adjusted her glasses and began reading. Her expression shifted slowly. Not dramatically, just gradually tightening. She looked at the timestamp, then the next message, then the geotag. She exhaled once. Greg, she said quietly, handing the phone toward my father. You should read this. He took it with a dismissive scoff. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You staged this? The number is active, I said. You can call it. The area code is 757. He didn't call. He read, left to right, then again. The bourbon glass in his hand tilted slightly. A drop landed on the stone near his shoe. Denise stepped forward. These are fabricated, she said. Anyone can fake screenshots. I agree, I said calmly, which is why the messages include consistent metadata, location stamps, 3 separate establishments, cross-referenced dates. I wasn't angry. I wasn't loud. I was precise. And there's a voice note, I added. Time-stamped, same number. The yard had gone completely quiet now. Even the cicadas seemed distant. My father lowered the phone slightly. Who is Marcus? He asked. Denise didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned toward the family. She's doing this because she's jealous, Denise said. She's always resented Emma. I didn't respond to that. Emotion invites chaos. Facts invite structure. My aunt cleared her throat. These timestamps go back 3 months, she said. And the hotel confirmation in one photo is visible. My father looked back down at the screen, then at Denise, then back at the screen. Who is Marcus? He repeated, this time without volume. Denise's composure shifted. Fine, she said, wiping at her face. I made a mistake, but that has nothing to do with Emma. I took a slow breath. This was the point where escalation could become spectacle. So I chose structure. Step 1, confirm the relationship. Step 2, confirm the timeline. Step 3, clarify the paperwork. I spoke gently. There's more. I opened the folder again and scrolled to the message that had stayed with me the longest. I didn't read it aloud. Instead, I handed the phone to my aunt again. She read the quoted reply slowly. Then she looked up at Denise. Denise, she said carefully, is Emma your biological daughter? Denise's face went completely still. Emma stood up. Mom? She asked quietly. My father looked between them. What is she talking about? He demanded. Denise's voice came out smaller now. It's complicated. Those 2 words did more damage than any accusation I could have made, because complicated isn't denial. It's confirmation. My father sat down abruptly in the nearest chair. The fire crackled softly. Emma took a step back. I didn't say anything further. I didn't need to. The information was now in circulation, and once truth enters a room, it doesn't leave easily. Then I waited. No one raised their voice. That was the first thing I noticed. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet rearranging of reality. Emma was still standing, hands at her sides. Denise had stopped crying. She looked less emotional now and more cornered. My father stared at the phone as if it might correct itself. It's complicated, Denise repeated, softer this time. My aunt didn't respond to that. She handed the phone back to me carefully, like it was evidence in a courtroom. I locked the screen. Then I put it back in my pocket. That part was important. I wasn't there to perform. I wasn't there to humiliate anyone. I had shown what needed to be shown. The rest would unfold on its own. My father stood slowly. "Is Emma your biological daughter?" he asked again. He wasn't loud. He wasn't theatrical. He sounded tired. Denise looked at him, not at Emma. "I raised her," she said. "That's what matters." "That's not what I asked." Silence. Emma's voice came out thin. "Mom?" Denise swallowed. "She's mine," she said finally. "In every way that counts." It was an answer shaped to avoid something, and my father understood that. He sat down again. This time, he didn't pick up his glass. My Aunt Ruth, who handles legal work for half the extended family, spoke next. "Greg," she said evenly, "if the estate documents were filed under the assumption of biological lineage, and that assumption isn't accurate, those documents will need to be reviewed." Denise turned sharply. "You can't just—" "I can," Ruth said calmly, "because I declined to revise them when I saw inconsistencies in the custody paperwork." That caught my attention. "Inconsistencies?" my father repeated. Ruth nodded once. "Dates that didn't match. A county record that didn't align. I asked for independent verification. I didn't receive it." This wasn't emotional now. This was procedural, and procedure has weight. I stepped back from the center of the circle, not dramatically, just physically. I had done my part. What happened next was not mine to control. Emma sat down slowly in her chair. She looked at the fire like it might explain something. I watched her, not Denise. There's a moment when a teenager realizes that adults are not stable pillars but shifting ground. I've seen that look before in hospital waiting rooms. It isn't anger first. It's recalculation. My father finally stood again, but this time not for a speech. He walked a few steps away from the circle, toward the darker edge of the yard. Denise followed him. They spoke in low voices. We couldn't hear the words, but we could see the distance between them growing with each exchange. I didn't join them. I didn't lean in. Instead, I sat down next to my grandmother on the porch. She didn't ask questions. She placed her hand over mine. "That was measured," she said quietly. "I didn't want chaos," I replied. "You didn't create it," she said. "You revealed it." We watched the yard together. About 10 minutes later, my father walked back alone. Denise did not follow immediately. He looked older, not dramatically, just aware. He didn't address the group. He didn't defend himself. He didn't attempt another speech. He sat down and looked at the ground. Emma stood and walked toward the house. My cousin followed her. No one stopped them. The bonfire burned lower. Relatives began speaking in softer clusters, not gossiping loudly, just processing. My aunt sat beside me. "You knew about this for months?" she asked. "Yes." "You waited?" "Yes." "Why?" I answered honestly. "Because information should be used only when necessary." She nodded slowly. "That was necessary." I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. As the night cooled, people began leaving in small groups. No dramatic exits, no shouting matches. Denise eventually walked to the car alone. The gravel under her heels sounded sharper than before. The engine started. The headlights cut across the yard once. Then she drove away. My father didn't follow. He stayed seated by the fading fire. And for the first time in my life, he wasn't directing the narrative. He was sitting inside it. I stood up once more. There was one final thing I needed to say. Not to Denise, not to the extended family, to him. I walked toward the fire, and then I stopped. The fire had settled into a low, steady burn. No flames leaping, just heat and embers. My father was sitting forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He didn't look at me when I approached. He knew I was there. I stayed standing, not over him, just near enough that we didn't have to raise our voices. "Dad?" I said. He flinched slightly at the word. Then he looked up. His expression wasn't defensive anymore. It wasn't polished. It was tired. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," I said calmly. "I came because Grandma invited me." He swallowed once. "I know," he said. "I didn't share those messages because I wanted to win something," I continued. "I shared them because you made a public statement about truth and family, and it wasn't accurate." He nodded slowly. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. The yard was quiet behind us. A few relatives lingered near the porch. No one interrupted. "I called you a mistake," he said after a moment. "Yes." "I shouldn't have." I didn't rush to respond. Silence isn't awkward when it's intentional. It gives people space to hear themselves. "I don't need an apology for the performance," I said. "I need consistency." He looked confused. "You've been rewriting the structure of this family for years," I explained. "Not emotionally, logistically, invitations, paperwork, titles. You've been building a version that doesn't include me." "That wasn't—" "It was," I said gently, not sharply, just steady. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "I thought I was simplifying things," he said, "making it easier." "For who?" I asked. He didn't answer. Behind us, my aunt spoke quietly with two cousins. I could hear fragments of words. Documents. Review. Verification. Process was already beginning. That mattered. "I'm not asking to be added back into a photograph," I said. "I'm not asking to be written into a will. I'm not asking for a retroactive relationship." He looked up again. "Then what do you want?" The question wasn't angry. It was confused. I considered it carefully. "I want structure," I said. "If you want a relationship with me, it needs to follow rules." He blinked. "Rules?" "Yes." I counted them calmly on my fingers. Rule 1, no public statements about me without speaking to me first. He nodded slowly. Rule 2, no erasing me in legal documents without transparency. Another nod. Rule 3, no pretending we're fine without actually addressing what's happened. He let out a long breath. "That sounds formal." "It is," I said, "because informal hasn't worked." The fire shifted. A small log collapsed inward. He looked down at his hands. "I didn't know about Emma," he said quietly. "I know." "And I didn't know about Denise." "I know." He rubbed his forehead. "I thought I had everything under control." "That's the thing about control," I replied. "It feels stable until it isn't." We sat there for a moment without speaking. Then he asked the question that mattered. "What do I do now?" It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was procedural. That was good. "You review the documents," I said. "You verify records. You decide how you want to define family going forward. And you do it honestly." He nodded. "And us?" he asked. "We move slowly," I said. "No performances, no big declarations, just actions." He looked at me carefully, as if recalibrating something he'd misunderstood for years. "I can do that," he said. "I hope so," I replied. I didn't extend my hand. I didn't hug him. Boundaries aren't built in a single conversation. They're built in repetition. Behind us, the porch light flicked on. My grandmother stood in the doorway, cane resting lightly against her leg. "Olivia," she called gently, "it's getting late." I nodded and stepped back from the fire. Before I turned away, I looked at my father once more. "This wasn't about revenge," I said. "It was about accuracy." He nodded. "I understand." I believed that he believed that, which was enough for now. I walked toward the porch. and I didn't look back. I stayed the night at my grandmother's house. The guest room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. The window was open just enough to let in the sound of crickets. I lay on top of the quilt for a while, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. In emergency medicine, after a critical case stabilizes, there's a quiet stretch where everyone checks monitors and resets equipment. No celebration, just assessment. That's what this felt like. The fallout didn't explode. It reorganized. Within 3 days, Denise had moved into a hotel. That part came to me through my cousin, who lives 2 streets over from my father. The arguments, he said, had been steady but controlled. Doors closing, long silences, no screaming, just truth settling into rooms it hadn't occupied before. On Monday morning, my aunt called me. "Your father reached out," she said. "He wants the estate documents reviewed." I leaned against my kitchen counter, still in scrubs. "Under what condition?" I asked. "That everything be verified independently. Birth records, custody records, trust allocations." That was good. "And?" I prompted. "And your name will remain included in the trust until further notice. Not because you demanded it, because your grandmother insisted." I exhaled slowly. "I didn't do this for inheritance," I said. "I know," she replied, "but documentation matters." It does. Paperwork shapes reality in ways emotion cannot. About 10 days after the reunion, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. "Olivia?" a quiet voice said. "Yes." "It's Emma." I sat down at my kitchen table. She didn't rush into the reason for calling. She talked about school first, about a test she'd taken, about a dog she'd seen outside the grocery store. Then she paused. "I didn't know," she said. "I believe you," I replied. Silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, just careful. "Am I going to be okay?" she asked. That question wasn't about biology. It was about stability. "Yes," I said, "but it may feel unsteady for a while." She breathed out softly. "Can I call you sometimes?" "You can," I said. "Anytime." That was the first real shift in the entire situation. Not the confrontation, not the documents, that phone call. Because the relationship that had been built on presentation was being replaced with something quieter and more honest. 3 weeks later, my father called. It was 7:12 in the morning. I had just poured cereal into a bowl and was standing at the counter in my apartment. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hi, Dad." He didn't speak immediately. "I've been reviewing everything," he said finally. "The paperwork, the timelines." I waited. "I should have asked more questions," he continued. "Years ago." "Yes," I said. "I didn't want to see complications." "That doesn't make them disappear." He sighed. "I don't know how to fix this." I leaned against the counter. "You don't fix it all at once," I said. "You follow steps." He was quiet, listening. "Step 1, finalize accurate documents." "Yes." "Step 2, stop making public declarations about family structure." Another pause. "Yes." "Step 3, rebuild privately, if you're willing to be consistent." He didn't argue. He didn't defend. "I can try," he said. "Trying is measured by action," I replied gently. He understood that. Over the next month, updates came through my aunt, revised filings, corrected records, independent verification of Emma's adoption paperwork. It turned out Denise had obtained custody years before meeting my father, but had allowed him to believe the circumstances were different. Legally, Emma was secure. That mattered. Emotionally, she was recalibrating. Denise and my father began mediation. Quietly. No social media statements, no extended family announcements. Process replaced narrative. At work, nothing changed. I still worked nights, still responded to codes, still moved in steps. But I noticed something about myself. I didn't flinch as easily when my phone buzzed. I didn't replay the reunion in my head. It had moved from active memory to documented event. There's relief in that. In early October, my grandmother came to visit my apartment for the first time. She inspected everything: kitchen cabinets, water pressure, the thermostat. Stable, she declared. We sat at my small dining table with iced tea. You handled that correctly, she said. I handled it deliberately, I replied. She smiled. Same thing. Before she left, she looked at me carefully. You stopped auditioning, she said. That was accurate. For 22 years, I had been trying to qualify for a role that wasn't offered. At the reunion, I stopped trying to qualify. I defined. There's a difference. Later that winter, I printed a photo and placed it on my refrigerator. It wasn't staged, it wasn't coordinated. It was taken on my phone in my grandmother's kitchen, my grandmother on one side, my mother on the other, Emma sitting cross-legged on the floor, mid-laugh. No matching outfits, no performance, just presence. And that was enough. I turned off the kitchen light. Then I went to bed. The next part of this story wasn't loud. It was steady. Winter came in quietly that year. The first cold morning, I stood in my kitchen wrapping both hands around a mug of coffee, watching steam rise toward the window. The radiator clicked softly behind me. My apartment felt settled, not silent in a lonely way, just ordered. After the reunion, life didn't transform overnight. It adjusted. My father and I spoke once every few weeks, short calls, practical updates, no big emotional declarations. He followed through on the document revisions. My aunt confirmed everything had been corrected properly, names aligned, records verified, no shortcuts, consistency, not apology. That mattered more. Emma kept calling, sometimes about school, sometimes about nothing at all. She asked questions I didn't always have answers to, but I answered honestly. One afternoon she said, "It feels weird not knowing which version of my life was real." I told her, "The parts where you were kind and trying, those were real. The rest we can sort through." She was quiet for a second. Then she laughed at something her dog did in the background. That's how healing sounds most of the time. Ordinary. My father came to my apartment once in early December. No announcement, no speech. He texted first. "Are you home? I'd like to stop by if that's okay." That was new. Asking. I said yes. He stood awkwardly in my living room at first, taking in the space, the small bookshelf, the framed photo on the refrigerator, the plant my grandmother had called optimistic but doomed. "You built this," he said. "Yes." He nodded slowly. We didn't rehash the reunion. We didn't dissect Denise or documents. We talked about work, about how hard night shifts are on the body, about how strange it feels to admit when you've been wrong. He didn't ask for immediate forgiveness. I didn't offer instant closeness. We followed the structure, step by step. Before he left, he paused at the door. "I'm learning," he said. "I know," I replied. And for the first time, I believed it might be true. The quiet lesson of all of this wasn't about exposing someone. It was about boundaries. For years, I thought being patient meant absorbing whatever came my way. I thought staying calm meant staying small. It doesn't. Silence can be a strategy, but only if you know when to stop using it. The bravest moment for me wasn't pulling out my phone. It was deciding I didn't need to perform my worth anymore. A few months ago, a colleague at the hospital confided in me about her own family situation. Different details, different dynamics, same pattern of being quietly minimized. She asked me, "How did you know when to speak?" I told her what I'll tell you. You speak when the facts are clear, when your intention is steady, when you're prepared for consequences and still willing to accept them. Not for drama, for order. This story isn't about revenge. It's about accuracy. It's about defining yourself instead of waiting to be defined. If you've ever been overlooked or quietly written out of your own family story, I see you. You don't have to audition for belonging. You can build your own structure. If this resonated with you, gently tap like and subscribe so we can keep building this calm, honest community together. And I'd really like to know where you're listening from. Comment your city and what time it is there right now. It always amazes me how many different places these stories reach. 2 of our most thoughtful stories are about to appear on your screen. If you're in the mood for something steady and real, I think you'll appreciate them. Thank you for listening.